Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of the Combat Room MMA. Today we're joined by Victor Altamirano, a Mexican UFC flyweight competing at the highest level in the flyweight division. Victor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. What's your day been like today?
Today I had some lessons. I was teaching some of my students. I have one of my students who's fighting this upcoming week on the 22nd of this month, and it's going to be his first amateur fight. So we've been focusing a lot on him. I've been making sure that he's ready, and this is as his first fight. A lot of things need to be done for the first time. Everything is everything's new when it's your first time. You get nerves that you've never felt before. You get competitions, anxiety that you never felt before. So because this is his first fight, I've just been given a lot of time to prepare him for everything that it entails.
So, how many students do you actually teach then?
I don't really know the exact number, but so far I only have this student that is fighting. This is so far my only student that is fighting, and this is his first amateur fight. But if I have to count, I would probably have about maybe 30 something students altogether.
So, what is your daily routine like as a UFC fighter?
Well, since I'm no longer in the UFC right now, it's a lot different. I get to work out and train really when in my own leisure. Since I've been doing it for so long, it's still a big part of my routine. I wake up, I go train. I teach a lot of my time now is spent coaching and teaching, and I train. My training has probably gone back probably half of what it used to be. Right now, I just focus on making sure that I'm still acquainted with everything that I'm teaching, making sure that whenever I pass on this knowledge to my students, that it's a knowledge that I'm constantly upkeeping and practicing myself. So I would just wake up and go train for a few hours and come back and go teach. And then I do that pretty much every day. Train, teach, train, teach.
So, what's one thing people would never guess about you just by looking at you?
One thing people would never guess about me, just looking at me. Oh man, I mean, I don't know. I guess, they wouldn't know that I played the cello unless I've told you, it's pretty, a lot of interviewers have told me, I've told this to many interviewers, so it's kind of out there, but if you just looked at me, you wouldn't really think of that. And when people look at me and they notice a cauliflower ear, they know that I'm in the sport, but I don't really look like a mean, tough fighter.
So, you're in the UFC flyweight division, so you're a smaller fighter. So, how many fights have you got in outside of the octagon just because, people think you're smaller?
Well, curiously enough, the more time you spend in the gym, the less time you spend outside of it. So I've never been in any altercation outside of the gym, outside of the mats. There have been a few brawls that I've been around with, but I was never involved in any of them, just because
Uh,
I spend much time in the gym.
and, how did you initially get into MMA? How did you get yourself involved? Or what martial arts were you training before MMA?
I started training Taekwondo when I was pretty young. I started around 6, but I only did it for 2 months and I got injured and I quit. And then I restarted again with Taekwondo when I was 12. And ever since then, I just kept training. I have not stopped training since I was 12. I did Taekwondo for about 10 years. Then I started doing Jiu-Jitsu. And the gym in which I started doing Jiu-Jitsu had some active fighters in which I was very involved with their camp. I was their sparring partner, their training partner. I basically had nothing to do but being at the gym all day, all the time. And I was just training with the fight camp, with the people who were fighting. So much so that they just asked me, why don't you fight? You're here all the time, doing everything you do. You might as well do it. And so I went ahead and did it. just kept training, just kept fighting. And it's just been something that's always been present in my life. Just martial arts has always been something that I've enjoyed doing. And I've done it so long for so many time, for so much time, so often that it took me to where I am today. I never really had a specific goal of becoming a professional fighter or a specific goal of making it to the UFC or a specific goal of anything regarding martial arts. I've always just had this general passion for it, and I just kept pursuing it.
So, since you just said you weren't always planning on becoming an MMA fighter, what was your plan before that?
I went to college and I studied linguistic anthropology. I wanted to graduate. I've always been really interested in the language aspect of what makes humans, culture. I've always been interested in how the way we communicate, we speak to one another and to ourselves shapes the people that we become, the people that we are. And whenever I went into college, I wanted to pursue that, linguistic anthropology, because I really wanted to dive down into what about us is made up by how we perceive the world and how we communicate with it. That was just always something that I really enjoyed doing. And unfortunately, I didn't really finish that degree, that career, and it wouldn't have made me any money anyway. It was just very, what would you say,
A hobby.
um, a hobby, yeah. But I stopped it. And then I just kept doing what I had always been doing, which was martial arts, and kept pursuing that. And because I just liked it so much, it just became everything I did, to the point that I got good enough to make a career out of it.
Oh, how long did that career progression take? Because, no one gets in the UFC accidentally.
Now, well, when I started fighting, from the point in which I started fighting to making it to the UFC, it probably took maybe 8, 7 years, Simply, I started pretty late, actually. I didn't start fighting until I was like 24 or 23. And I had been training since I was 12. So I could have, if I really wanted to, but I never really had an interest in hurrying up and making it into the fighting leagues. But if that would have been my goal, I could have started a lot younger. I just, was never really super interested in making sure that that happened. It just happened because I was doing it all the time.
So you start actually fighting professionally at 24, or were you having amateur fights before then?
Yeah, yeah. No, I had some amateur fights around before. I had a lot of Taekwondo tournaments. I had some Muay Thai tournaments. So I was pretty comfortable with competition scenes and the pressure of competing. And whenever I went into my amateur fight, then obviously it was a little different, but I wasn't so taken aback by the ambience and the pressure of competition. I had already been competing for many years by then. And it did make me nervous, of course, like any competition does. And it was the first time doing something of that sort. But I was around that age, and whenever I fought, that was my first amateur fight. I had about 3 or 4 amateur fights. Then I became a pro, and then I've had maybe like 15 fights, 16 pro fights.
So what do you think the most misunderstood thing about MMA fighters is?
The most misunderstood thing about MMA fighters is, mhm, you know, I I would say that many people believe that if you are so dedicated to this sport, you don't really think of much else outside of it when it comes to, intellect, or perhaps a side hobby that stimulates your artistry, or perhaps your care for something else. People who look at this sport from the outside just can very easily think of the athletes are just, violent people who don't really have any keen sense of, what would you say, care, or thought process or something that's more intellectual than that. But I've met many people in this sport, not just MMA, but also in jiu-jitsu and also in Muay Thai, fighters in general, that there's a lot more to them than just fighting. It requires a lot of thought and not just your urge for violence that makes you a good fighter. People be are good fighters because they understand the concepts that make a fight, the concepts within oneself that you have to deal with. You have to be violent or you lose. You have to try to hurt somebody or they hurt you. And to do that, you have to practice, and you practice with your friends, you practice with people you care about. So you have to be able to navigate that duality of being violent with people that you care for, who are your training partners, and doing so with respect. And you know, it's a really bonding experience, but it's not something that can be done unless you have practice doing
And with all the fighters nowadays, which fighter do you see yourself in the most?
it. Which fighter do I see myself in the most? I don't know. I've never had any admiration for any particular fighter. I've had I do acknowledge the talent that exists out there, but I don't really see myself outside of myself. I don't really see myself in anybody else. I've always just focused on who everybody is and me as me being me, you
Yeah.
know. Do
And
you see yourself in a fighter?
yeah, Tony Ferguson. Uh,
Tony Ferguson? What about Tony Ferguson?
you know, I got the full Tony Ferguson
Yeah,
thing. Now I'd say, battling adversity. You know, if you,
adversity.
so back to you. What fighter, what fighters did you like seeing growing up?
Growing up, growing up, I watched a lot of boxing because my family liked boxing. So I didn't get to see a lot of MMA fights. So growing up, I would see Cesar Chavez, Julio Cesar Chavez back in the day. I remember Oscar De La Hoya. I remember Floyd when he was just getting started. Um, Growing up, who else did I see? Marquez, Pacquiao. These boxers mainly. I
Manny
remember
Pacquiao.
seeing them. Yeah, Manny Pacquiao. So those are the fighters that I grew up because my family really, really enjoyed boxing, and I would get to see these fighters, boxing, and I remember just watching, and my grandfather and my parents would just have their little, oh, do this, do that, do the slip. They would really get into what was going on, and I was just seeing that happening, seeing violence being enjoyed by others, and the skillful that it took for it to be displayed to the masses. And when I would see that, I thought, oh, that's really good. I mean, I would see it and I thought, I could do that, but little did I know how much dedication, discipline, and hard work it takes to get to the level of that. Of course I learned it, and to some point I achieved it myself. But back growing up, I would see those fighters, the boxers, really, not really MMA.
And what did those boxers teach you, mentality wise?
They mentally wise, it taught me that you just gotta stay in the fight. You can't go into the fight expecting to not get hit. No one goes into the fight and you win and everything's nice and dandy. You win and you're pretty beat up yourself. It taught me that victory doesn't mean being safe from harm. It taught me that winning doesn't mean you didn't get beat up.
And that you actually have to earn that victory.
Yeah, you have to earn it. You have to earn that victory. You winning does not mean that you escaped any injuries or any harm to yourself.
So, Where did you actually grow up and how did that shape you? Because a lot of fighters come from rough backgrounds.
Yeah. Well, I did grow up um, with, I wouldn't say scarcity, because my parents would always provide everything that myself and my siblings needed. So I'm very grateful for that. But at the same time, there was some adversity when it came to moving to a new country and trying to adapt to everything, um, trying to be trying to be alone. I felt very alone growing up because when you live in a place and you go to school and you grow up in the same place that your parents grew up, they can tell you, it's like, hey, don't do this, don't do that. They can help you with your homework. They can advise you on where to go, where not to go, this and that and the other. But when you grow up in a place that your parents don't know and they don't know the language of and they don't know the culture of, there is no there's not much room for bonding between you and your parents. There's not much room for them to help you navigate the specific situations that you are in because they didn't grow up in that culture. And I felt pretty alone trying to navigate myself coming from a kid to being a teenager to being an adult because my parents did it in a whole different way. And doing that, I knew that I just had to push hard. I just had to move forward. I just had to, I guess, metaphorically fight to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve because no one's going to be there trying to help me achieve them.
So did you keep that same mentality through your full career?
Yes,
Even
yes.
even when you had like people to support you?
Yeah. And fortunately, I've always had many people who support me. And of course, my teammates, my coaches, my family has always been there. And as much as they can, I can't expect them to support me at every single time 100%. It's not fair for me to ask that of them, but I do really appreciate the many times in which they have,
Yeah.
and having the experience of not having anybody has also helped because I've had people now, and I'm grateful for it because I know what it's like to not have.
So was there any point in your MMA career where you just felt like quitting or that it wasn't for you?
No, no, there wasn't any point in my MMA career when I felt like quitting. There at the beginning of my training, I remember when I first started jujitsu, and it was something very new to me. It was so difficult, and I spent every training session just getting tapped and choked and armbarred, and for so many months at a time, I did thought about quitting because I didn't feel like I was making any progress with myself. I didn't feel like I was getting good at all. But I just kept at it because I had no other option. I had to quit school, and I just had this dead end job, and I thought this is the only thing that brings me joy. And even though it's very frustrating, and even though sometimes it takes away joy because of how hard it is the only thing that I'm choosing to do for myself. So I just kept doing it, and that's what kept me involved.
And who pushed you the most, like throughout your career, or who was there for you the most?
For me, the most, you know, I could say my coach, my first MMA coach, Juan Tatum, he was there for a lot of things. I can't really name the amount of things that he was there for. Another one of my early coaches, Michael Malone, he was there, very, very emotionally supportive, was very level-headed, was there for me to, make sure that I navigated everything in a nice, cool way. Those were still two of very important people. Um, and then, of course, my training partners, one of my longest standing training partners, David Luna, always had my back, always, always. And I'm very fortunate for him, very grateful that he's been in my life outside and inside the mats. I think those three people, amongst many others, but these are the three that that were some of the first people that made impact in the beginning of my martial arts career, you know.
And we got asked, as an MMA fighter, what's your opinion on cauliflower ears? Do you think people should keep them or get them trained?
Well, it's a really difficult thing to do because when you get cauliflower ears, people do drain them. People do drain cauliflower ears. The only reason you get them is because after you drain a cauliflower ear, in order to not have cauliflower ear, you have to leave it alone. You have to drain it and leave it alone, and then it goes away. But when you have a fight coming up or a tournament coming up, you cannot stop training. So after you drain it, you got to go back to training, and it just gets agitated again and it pops up, and then you drain it. But the more times you drain it, the less likely it is to go back exactly how it was. And it just keeps hardening and hardening, and then you get, you know, cauliflower ear. But people do drain it. People do drain it, and people who have it drained them. They did drain them, but because they train all the time, it didn't matter that they drained them. They would have been way worse had they not trained them.
So, what was the situation with you with your cauliflower ear?
Well, I have two. The first time I got it was on my first amateur fight. Actually, I I was I was in guard, and I kept punching him, and he kept punching my head, and he kept punching my ear. And so at the end of the fight, it was puffed up. I got my cauliflower ear on my first amateur fight because he just kept getting punched. And in preparation to that fight, it was already agitated. It was already tender. So on the day of the fight, when it got punched, it just blew it up. And then it got drained. And I had more fights coming up, so I couldn't just leave it alone. And that's how I got my cauliflower. It's just constant, constant beating on it, friction on it, just drain it and go back to training, drain it and go back to training. And it just became what it was. Are you gonna get some? Are you gonna thinking of getting some cauliflower here?
Uh, uh, like that's the thing,
Yeah.
if you could choose, would you rather have it or not have it? Because it's seen as like a badge of honor for some fighters, but a lot of fighters would prefer not to have it.
I like having it. I like having it because if I didn't have it, I know that I would be prone to have it. And I don't want to go through that again.
But if you could choose, would you just, you know, never get them again?
No, I would really go either way. If I didn't have them and if I kept training, I've known people who have been in the sport for decades and they've never had them. That's just, I guess, the way their ear is shaped and the cartilage, what have you, who knows? But if I didn't have them and I kept practicing, because I knew I'm going to keep doing martial arts, if I didn't have them, I knew I would be prone to get them again. I don't think there would be any escape for me.
So during your first UFC fight, what was going through your head, mentally, how were you feeling? Were you scared? Were you overwhelmed? What was that like?
I was very excited. Of course, I'm always nervous. I'd always been nervous before a fight. Everything that's important to you makes you nervous. And I was very excited. It was the first time that I would be fighting in the big leagues, in the main stage. So I was nervous and very exciting to be representing of all the work that I have been doing for the first time in the UFC. So I was mostly excited.
So what was your pay like for your early UFC fights? Were like, because the reputation is being a white underpaid as a fighter. So what was that
So
about?
at first, I think everybody at first gets started with 10,000 to win, 10 to show and 10 to win. If there's any nuances upon it, then it's, I guess, managed by the manager or, distributed differently. But I wouldn't know who's making who when they first start.
And so, what percentage of your fight purse actually goes to your camp?
So it depends on the camp. Different camps would manage it differently. Some camps ask you for 10, some people ask you for 5. You know, I'd rather not disclose that information. It's not really my business to be telling people how much that is, but depending on the camp. But it's usually, if a camp's charging you 15% of your purse, that's too much. That's, you should probably look into something. So for anybody out there whose camp is charging 15%, they should probably look into something else.
And which fight changed your confidence the most? Maybe for the better or for the worse. Making you feel like you might be able to make it to the top with how well you performed, or
Well, there were two fights. My second fight, which was the one in Utah, where I won the 50,000 bonus performance of the night. That really changed my confidence for the best. It made me realize as a statement that I belonged here. I had what it took to finish. To fight. I was dropped at the beginning of that round. I came back and I finished the fight. So that one really helped out. That one was something that let me know that I was where I belonged. And another fight that affected my confidence, and maybe this one for the worse, was the one in Mexico City where I took my opponent down 9 times and pretty much dominated the whole fight. And then I lost a split decision. And it made me wonder if the UFC wanted me there. It made me wonder if despite my amazing performance, they just didn't want me to win. And everybody knew I won. I mean, everybody across all social medias, people backstage, as soon as they just said that was a robbery, the whole arena was started to yell and make noise. You couldn't even hear him, my opponent, speak his victory speech because everybody was booing him. Everybody knew. So getting robbed of that fight was something that really affected my confidence. Not that it matters, not that it should matter. When it comes to fighting, you gotta literally, metaphorically fight through these hardships. But it was very heartbreaking for me.
so do you think there's some dodgy refereeing in the UFC? Because a lot of the UFC referees they'll get their calls right a lot of the time. So do you think?
Well, it's a hard job. I think that the UFC has done a really good job with the referees. You can only do so much with human error, and they've done pretty good. Considering all the nuances and having to make calls that on a split second you have to make these calls, and if you make the wrong call, you have to pick between making the wrong call and finishing the fight too early, or making the wrong call and costing somebody their health permanently. So these are the two. This is the line that these referees have to navigate. Do they call the fight early and maybe the fighter gets mad because he thought he could keep going? Maybe. Do they call the fight late and now this guy has brain damage or has a broken neck or ACL because they should have ended it early and the ref was job was to do that? That's a fine line to navigate. So I would say that there have been some times in which it is a little dodgy that they stop it so early, but I will also say, this is human error, and they're having to pick the best for the fighters. The referee's job is to upkeep the safety of the fighters, and
So what?
sometimes they do that.
So what UFC referee do you look forward to having referee your fights or?
I really enjoyed. I had a Dean once. It was pretty cool. It's really hard to pick a good or bad referee because if you're a good fighter and you are not really doing anything illegal, then it doesn't really matter what referee you have. All referees are good if the fighters are doing their job correctly.
And a bit of a question. A lot of people might be wondering, what's your situation like with the UFC right now? because you're in a bit of a tough spot with, you know, a 3-5 losing streak. So
Well, I'm not in the UFC anymore.
when did that happen?
That happened on October of 2024.
And was that a tough call? How did they break the news to you?
Well, my manager called me. He just said that they closed my contract, and that was that.
So what was going through your head when that happened?
Well, it was a little disheartening, especially because my last performances, my last two performances were really good performances. One of which was a robbery, so I felt that it was a very unfair call from their behalf to cut me when they had robbed me. Well, the UFC didn't rob me. They are not the judges, but I felt that I was robbed. I didn't. I know I was robbed in one of those fights, and for them to cut me, not considering that my performances were, I would say, stellar. You know, none of my fights have been boring fights. None of my fights are boring fights, and I just felt a little, upset about that.
And where can we see you in the next stage of your career? Are you gonna retire? Are you just gonna be, focusing on practicing coaching other people now? Or
Yeah, I'm just gonna focus on coaching. Really, that's really what I'm going to do. I've been coaching since before I was in the UFC. So now that I have my experience and more knowledge to give out, then I feel a lot more confident doing it and really contributing in the
so
coaching aspect of the sport.
are we gonna ever see you fight again? Or, have you put down the gloves and retired?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah, I'm retired. I really don't want to fight again. It's it demands a lot from you. It demands a lot from somebody, and that's something that I'm willing to do. But I have a family, and financially, it is not a wise decision to continue to pursue this. If it had better pay, then I would continue to do it. But for the amount of time that it requires you to do this well and safe, it does not equate to a good payout.
So what do you want your fans to remember you for, throughout your career, or the type of fighter that you were?
I hope it's excitement. I hope that it's excitement. You know, I was never a ground fighter, boring fighter, just hold you down or pull guard or whatever. So I hope that they remember the excitement. There's just excitement.
And is there any message you have to your fans or to younger fighters or people who are, unsure with what they should be doing with their careers?
I would say that if you just continue pursuing what you're passionate about, you're not going to be unhappy to where it takes you. Very often you people have plans, they want to do this and want to do that, and they're unsure of which direction to go and what path of life to take. But I would say that if you just focus on devoting time to the things that you love doing, whatever that happens to be, it will take you to a place that you will be happy to be in.
And, one last question before we go. Would you recommend this lifestyle to anyone else, or would you promote this? Because it's a tough sport.
It is a tough spot. Financially, I wouldn't. No, financially, I wouldn't. But if you have if you're not looking to be rich of anything, if you really just want to live to the fullest, it is an amazing career when it comes to just living to the fullest, to when it comes to realizing goals, when it comes to pushing yourself, when it comes to the satisfaction of knowing how hard you can go and knowing what you're capable of mentally and physically, then this is an amazing career to be in because if you have the drive, it takes you to really amazing places. But if you're trying to establish yourself financially, I would say no. But what is important to you? Is money important to you? Is living important to you? If both are important to you, you only have one life, and even within that life, you only have one youth. So if you want to live it to the fullest and want to make sure that you exercise the passion that you have for the sport and you are a fighter, because not everybody is made to be a fighter, not mentally, but if you have that and you have youth and you don't have a family that depends on you, then I would say go for it.
Um, so thank you so much, Victor Altamirano, for coming on my podcast. Thanks for giving me the opportunity, and I'd love to have you on again sometime in the future.
Of course, my pleasure.